Good morning and welcome to Bible study, Sunday school time at Calvary Baptist Church. And it's the last fling of the summer, and so my attendance is down. I'm in the room by myself, but we've got a basement full of children today, so that's a good sign. And I think maybe our people are kind of taking the weekend off before school starts, but we have grandchildren and neighborhood children in our basement today. So hopefully, I think Brenda's planning to do children's church today. So that'll work out great. It's first Sunday of August, time to get that geared up. Okay. Well, we've been doing a study entitled More Than a Sidekick, Serving Alongside Others. And we looked at Aaron and Hur, who held Moses' arms up in the battle. We looked at Barak last week, who helped Deborah. He was one who was commissioned by God to go do a task, and he wouldn't go without her. But Deborah, the prophetess, the judge, she went with him, and God was able to bring a great victory for them. And then today we look at David. And there's a lot of helpers around King David. He had a lot of people who helped him and walked with him in the journey. So early on, you'll recall David was a young boy, shepherd boy, youngest child of Jesse of Bethlehem. And when Saul had abused his right as the king, King Saul, then God appointed Samuel the prophet. Samuel was a prophet. He was a judge. He was a priest. He was like this go-between, jack of all trades or whatever, who really was the bridge between the people and the king and the kingdom. And great guy, Samuel, wonderful man, servant of God. So we know the story how God told Samuel to go to the house of Jesse and he would anoint the next king. And so he got there, and here's all these big scrapping boys come in, and Samuel knew in his heart that wasn't who God was going to appoint. And so finally get to the last one, and he says, look, aren't there any more? What's the deal here? And they said, oh, well, there's the boy, David. He's out in the field taking care of the sheep, but we'll go get him. Brought him, and then God said, he's the one. And so, and in that, just like God, we can look at the stature and say, whoa, that's a good one. We think that'd be a great one. And then God comes along and says, that's not the one I would choose. I know which one is right and which one is best. So he chose David. David then, the shepherd boy, was anointed to be king. No one advertised it. Nobody said anything about it. He went to take care of his brothers who were at the hill, at the valley, and they were being challenged by the Philistines, specifically the giant of the Philistines, Goliath. And so David wasn't afraid. David went and whooped him and killed him, and so then David found favor with Saul. Why? Because David was not afraid when Saul the king had shown his fear to the people. Well, so what happened was David went to Saul's castle, his palace, and lived there. He was a musician, as we know. He wrote most of the Psalms in our Bible. And so he was there, and he played, and it would soothe David's spirit. Well, Saul recognized David's ability. He couldn't help it to know that David was fearless, and that David was also somehow a servant of God. He was able to do what God would have him to do. And so David, however, didn't really push it. He simply was respectful to Saul. He understood the order of authority, and so he put himself in line with that and was in place. And they went to battle and they did things. And that's what we're kind of going to pick up here today. Saul was a complicated character. He was big and tough, and he knew it. He was the choice. And once he became king, it was just like nothing to keep him humble from this point. Um, some would say Saul had a schizophrenic behavior. He was torn between whether to admire and respect David or to kill him. But David served him with excellence. David took care of Saul. He did what he was supposed to do. Didn't keep Saul from being envious of him, but he still knew his place. That was a good thing about David. He always knew who he was. He didn't have anything to prove. He had a bunch of big brothers who were tough guys and who were warriors. He didn't have to prove anything to them. He could simply be who he was, and he was willing to do that. So we are going to plug in here at 1 Samuel 18, verses 5 through 7 first, and we're going to talk about how we should always give our best. We should always do our best. Those who are in authority over us, we should follow them with our best service. We should give them our best. We should do our best. We should be our best. And we aren't always. I know I'm not. I know there's 2 or 3 things that I promised I would do, even in the last few months, and I haven't done them. And I don't feel like I'm giving it my best. I don't feel like I'm doing my best. And so that's not a good place. That's not a good feeling. But David was willing to do that. Let's read 1 Samuel 18, verses 5 through 7. David marched out with the army and was successful in everything Saul sent him to do. Saul put him in command of the fighting men, which pleased all the people, and Saul's servants as well. As the troops were coming back, when David was returning from killing the Philistine, the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with tambourines, with shouts of joy, and with 3-stringed instruments. And as they danced, the women sang, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And I'm sure that was on the pop chart, and it went way to the top real fast once they came back from the battle with the Philistines. So let's just kind of look at this a little bit. David, after defeating Goliath, he just kind of went from the shepherd's field to the king's court, and that was a big move for him. But he always understood his role to Saul. He always understood that he did not have the right to do anything against God's anointed. He always knew that, and that's what I think made David so humble and made him so powerful, was the fact that he understood you just have to trust God. He was a man after God's own heart, and he was willing to trust God. He was loyal, he was obedient, and even when Saul said to him, I'm going to put you in charge of these fighting men, go out and whoop them, and they went to the Philistine. Now, don't get upset about that, saying killing the Philistine, singular. It could be the Philistines, plural, and they just left it on. The Philistine people is what that could be. It also could mean killing of Goliath, but we don't know how much time has passed in here. We do know that he has been with Saul in Saul's court for a while. So he was planning to soothe him and to take care of him, his emotional needs. So it pleased the people. It could mean the general populace, or it could just mean the troops specifically. Either way, word got out that, boy, if you want somebody in charge, you want David. David's the man. He is the man of the hour, and he's the one who can get the job done, not Granger, but David. He's the one who gets it done. So the women came out after they came back from battle, and oftentimes women would do this. Why? Because they were glad to see the men come home, but also they wanted to know who didn't make it and who was going to be a widow. But when they came back victorious and everyone was intact, they they rejoiced and they praised God. And so what did they do? Well, they had their own little parade when the guys came back. It was their victory parade, and they had some musical instruments, tambourines. They shouted for joy, and they even played with the three-stringed instrument, which says they might have been um, sitting in one place rather than moving around a bunch. They might have been, instead of walking around and doing all this, there was a band that was there that was in one place, and they weren't moving. And then it says, as they danced, the women sang. And what was their song? Well, Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Now, was that literal? Probably not. I mean, how many Philistines were there? And they kept singing that song. You'd think eventually you'd run out of Philistines to kill. But maybe it was an exaggeration. Maybe it was simply a comparison that, and no disrespect to Saul, he was doing his part. He was the king, and he was listed first. They made sure that nobody was insubordinate in any of that. But they knew who was being victorious. Now, if you were the leader, if you were the one in charge, like Saul, wouldn't you say, "Yes, I'm so glad David's on my team. I'm so glad I appointed him. You know how he got there. It's because I recognized him as whatever." Instead of becoming jealous or becoming, upset about the fact that they honored him more than they were honoring you, they weren't. They were simply honoring them. And could they help it if they thought that David had killed more than Saul did? It probably wasn't just David. It was probably the group that he was controlling, that he was over, that he killed that many. But they recognized him as a shrewd leader, as one who was wise in battle, and one who took care of business and honored the one who was over him. So, whatever you're given to do, just do it your best. And that's what David was trying to do, wasn't it? Then in our next section, we're reminded that we should give our best even if we're not valued, or even if it doesn't seem to be what it ought to be. If we don't get the credit, it's okay. It's okay if you don't get the credit, because what happens is not everyone ought to be praised. I don't think we ought to be praised. Matter of fact, I just want to be able to know that we thought of the right things, we did the right things, and it got done, and God was glorified. That's what matters. So the next verses 8 through 11 of Samuel 18 say, Saul was furious and resented this song. They credited tens of thousands to David, he complained, but they only credited me with thousands. How much more jealous can you get, right? He says, what more can he have but the kingdom? And we don't know if Saul knew that Samuel had gone and anointed David to be the next king under God's authority. Probably not. But he's just saying, look, man, I mean, I'm in the palace, but what's David going to be? What's going to happen next? And so verse 9 says, so Saul watched David jealously from that day forward. The next day, was the next day literally? Or was it the next day they went to battle? Or was it the next day when it came to Saul? We don't know. He says, an evil spirit sent from God came powerfully on Saul. He began to rave inside the palace. David was playing the lyre as usual, but Saul was holding a spear. And he threw it, thinking, I'll pin David to the wall. But David got away from him twice. Now, I want you to think about this. He's brewing up inside. He's not talked himself down. He's not said, I'm so glad David's on my team. No, instead he's thinking, why do they think more of David than they do of me? I'm their king. That's a bad place to talk yourself into. That's not a good place to be. And it will cause you to do stupid and foolish things. And what's he going to do? He's going to kill David. Now, you might say, oh, yeah, he's going to throw the spear and he's going to pin his clothes to the wall. No, he's going to pin David to the wall. It's not like he's going to pin his clothes to where he can't get away without, shedding his robe or whatever. No. He's going to pin him literally body everything to the wall. And so he's going to throw the spear at him and do this. And he threw it. And David got away from him twice. Now, we don't know if he threw it twice in the same day. We don't know if it happened two different incidences. And actually, I think maybe it's in chapter 19, there's another incident that's listed. So it could just be the writer saying here, it happened twice. Here's one instance, and then, a couple chapters over, oh, here's another instance. We don't know. It might have happened even more than once or twice or 6 times. We don't really know. And does it matter? No, doesn't really matter. We just know he did it more than once. And then you think, man, what kind of evil spirit was in him that he would do that even more than once? Well, he watched David jealously. He watched David to wonder what he would be. Now, we don't really have the text that says what David's reaction was to the assault or the attempt of the assault, other than we know he escaped. He was able to get away. He was able to save Saul the public humiliation of killing the most popular guy who was there. And that wouldn't have been very smart, would it? We just know that he was able to do what he needed to do. And then last, I'm about out of time here. Samuel 18, verses 12 to 16 say this. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had left Saul. That's what happens when you don't obey God. That's what happens when you try to do it for yourself. You try to do it on your own. That's what happens to you. God will pull his spirit away from you. Therefore, Saul sent David away from him and made him commander over 1,000 men. David led the troops and continued to be successful in all his activities because the Lord was with him. When Saul observed that David was very successful, he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he was leading their troops. Just a couple of thoughts out of this. Give your best to honor God. Give your best because it's the right thing to do. Give your best even if you're in opposition, and give your best because when you do, God will be honored. And it doesn't matter if you get praise or people pat you on the back. Sure, all of Israel and Judah loved David because he was leading their troops. I mean, they were going into battle and they were being victorious, and probably not a lot of people were being annihilated or wiped out on their side. And a lot of husbands were coming home. A lot of young men were coming home. And that's a good thing to have happen. Just a couple of words here. The scripture uses the word that the spirit had left Saul. I said that's a hard place to be. And then another thought. Saul put David in charge of even more fighting men, stuck him out on the front line, so to speak, to see what might happen to him. Because, what if you can get him killed in battle? That just takes away your problem, right? Wrong, because if you put him out there and he gets successful, then now he's more popular, and that backfires on you. Then the other thing, it says in verse 15, he dreaded him. He dreaded him, and that just means he didn't want to be around him, because he always felt inferior when he was with David. Why? Because the Spirit of God had left him. He didn't have the Spirit of God in him. And because of that, he knew he wasn't right. He knew things weren't right. And so he dreaded being around him simply because when he was with him, the Spirit of God was on him. Folks, I don't know why people fight against the Spirit of God. I don't know why people will attack Christians. I don't know why they'll go after us. We're the most non-aggressive people. I mean, if the worst thing we do is say to people, if you don't trust in Jesus, you're on your way to hell, because that's what we say. And that is part of the worst thing we say to people. We don't try to destroy them. We don't try to tear them down. But that word dreaded, I think there's a lot of people in our society today who dread being around the things of God, the same way that he dreaded that. It differs from the word afraid. It means that he was intimidated by it. It means that he he had this jealous disposition toward David. It means that he would look for anything he could to get rid of him. So keep that word in mind, that people today, if you're a believer and you're trusting in Jesus, they dread you. You are dreaded to them. Well, time's up. I got to go. God bless y'all. Bye-bye.